There's nothing in existence that is as versatile as animation. You can tell almost any story you want in any way you want. The possibilities are literally limitless. And over the 20th century, people started to explore some of those possibilities, making movies that have changed the world, for better or worse. Which is why I wanted to do something probably nobody has ever done before. Watch, review, and rank them all. The Disney movies, the Don Bluth movies, the old Christmas movies, the handful of Pixar and DreamWorks movies, the Disney sequels, even the Studio Ghibli movies, and around 15 others as well, mostly from the 1990s that shouldn't be left out. Have you ever wondered how Kiki's Delivery Service compares with The Hunchback of Notre Dame, or how The Secret of Nim compares with Pinocchio? Well, now you finally have the answers to those questions. The journey animation went on throughout the 1900s is honestly incredible. There are so many brilliant stories that show the struggle to keep it alive and bring it to where it is today. And this is only the first part of my quest to rank every animated movie. Now, that's a huge task and one I will probably never finish, but having successfully done everything from before 2000, what better place to collect ourselves and summarize everything we've seen, especially because my opinions on pretty much everything have changed with time, and so has my ability to actually present my thoughts in a watchable video. A true ranking of every animated movie shouldn't rely on my viewers having to subject themselves to hours of legal torture just to understand the full story. I want to go back, fix the most glaring issues in my ranking, and do a worst to best style video compiling all of my actual thoughts, presented in an actual way, with an actual voice. If you really want to go back and see what I thought originally, you still can, but my goal with this video is that you really won't feel the need to. But episodes 9 through 12 I think are genuinely okay, so you can check those out if you want. And if you think I'm missing a movie, comment with the hashtag #AddThisMovieYouFool, and I'll probably make a note of it to add on at a later date. But I think that's it, so without further ado, let's dive into it. This is gonna be a very long video. So we're actually starting even below F tier, and also below F tier. The worst animated movie from the 20th century simply is not good enough to be the worst. Now, this movie has some pretty fierce competition for last place, so to be last, to be the worst in the entire 20th century, it would have to be filled with racial stereotypes, one of the worst messages of any movie I've ever watched, unable to make a single scene without the main character getting sexually harassed on screen, absolutely anger-inducing at every turn, and somehow, despite all of that, still one of the most boring things I've ever had to put myself through. But surely, no movie that bad could possibly exist. But Thumbelina proved me wrong. Thumbelina is not just the worst movie in this video, but the worst movie I've ever watched, and probably the worst movie that's ever been made. Very few movies, maybe even just this one, have the ability to actually make me mad. But this one is so bad that I was pissed off for pretty much the entire runtime. I don't even know where to begin here. Probably at the beginning, because the only way I can describe the fall into despair I felt during this movie is by taking you along to fall with me. So the movie starts with Thumbelina immediately falling in love with some random prince, and they sing the most cookie-cutter love song ever written. It starts off tame enough, but that's how it traps you. So then he disappears from the movie for an hour, and Thumbelina gets kidnapped by some frogs, and every single one of them is one of the most horrible Mexican stereotypes I've ever seen. They're all very promiscuous, they all talk exactly the way you think, they're all criminals, they all live in a pawn shop. I swear to God that one of their names is Gringo, which doesn't even make any sense because that's not even what that means. And these frogs are trying to force Thumbelina into an arranged marriage with one of the sons. And believe it or not, this is only the first of 3, yes, 3 times that this happens in the movie. So because Thumbelina has no agency, she has to be rescued, at which point she's immediately found by this Gilbert Gottfried beetle, who has to be one of the creepiest characters I've ever seen. I've been saying I've ever seen a lot, and yeah, it's true.
I let her go. She's not my type. She's an ugly type. I don't like ugly. You'd prefer this.
Oh, Mr. Beetle! I don't even know you. Would you stop?
Stop! How can I stop? I'm crazy about you, Toots.
So this is where you really start to see how badly every male character in the movie treats her, which gets even worse when the Beetle starts manipulating her into thinking that he'll help her get home if she promises to come with him to this dance and sing for all of his friends, which, yes, means about what you're thinking it means, but oh no, her bug disguise comes off, and now she's been revealed.
My dear is ugly.
She's so ugly, she's hurting my feelings.
Man, it's a good thing that women are just objects for men to use with no feelings of their own, because otherwise this would be pretty problematic, huh? So Thumbelina escapes again, and then the frog and the beetle decide to work together to try to get Thumbelina back. So this isn't just sexism anymore, this is seriously dangerous. So then she gets saved from hypothermia by this kindly field mouse and a mole who seem sympathetic to her struggles, only for them to then totally betray her and become the third group of people in this 90-minute movie that tries to force Thumbelina into a future she didn't choose. And this one is the most ridiculous by far, because the field mouse, played by Carol Channing, proceeds to sing one of the best songs I've ever heard to Thumbelina. Mary the Mole is without a doubt the low point of the movie, but it's only one of many, and it's the only part of this absolute dumpster fire that's ironically enjoyable. And it absolutely is. This song is set to the tune of Here Comes the Bride, and basically consists of the field mouse saying, "Trust me, you're not smart enough to make your own decisions, so I'll make them for you." In fact, it was so terrible that it won a Razzie, which is basically an anti-Oscar, making Thumbelina the only animated movie ever to win one. I highly encourage all of you to watch this song on YouTube now. I didn't even need to watch the ending where Thumbelina gets married to the mole against her will, only for all of her past abusers to break into the wedding and all collectively chase her to finally see once and for all who will win the main character. To know that this movie had zero competition for last place. And by the end, Thumbelina realizes that the person she fell in love with at the very start of the movie was really the right choice after all. But it carries this really dark and terrible undertone that's barely even an undertone at all. The moral of this movie is essentially that people from separate races cannot and should not marry, and the sheer idea of it is practically unthinkable. Like, if you want to make a movie where a girl is running from a bunch of serial rapists, fine, I guess, but don't have the message of that movie be that the only reason they're doing it is because they're different races. Like, I can't even believe I'm having to, like, say this right now. And even after all of this, I've barely even scratched the surface of how much of a complete and utter failure this movie is. Every song is terrible, every character is terrible, every scene seems worse than the last, and that might be because that's exactly the case. It has one of the worst concepts and especially executions of any film I think genuinely ever made. It's filled with tons of terrible racist and sexist stereotypes that are seriously harmful to perpetrate, and somehow despite all of this, it's still one of the most boring things I've ever watched. So, this is a Don Bluth movie? Yeah. The guy who made The Secret of Nim and An American Tail, the guy who, depending on who you ask, saved animation, was responsible for this. During test screenings, he put the Disney logo at the start of the movie to make audiences like it more. Everyone who worked on this movie knew exactly what they were doing and saw no problem with it, and that's one of the most sickening parts about this. I had never watched a movie that filled me with actual anger, and honestly, I've never watched one since. This is pretty much my only experience of watching a movie and not just being bored, but being actually mad the whole way through. I absolutely detest this movie, and for that reason, nothing else can even come close to being the worst animated movie of the entire 20th century.
The test will be watching paint dry.
Interestingly enough, this next movie has actually disappeared from the internet since I last reviewed it in July 2022, so my footage will be coming from there, but if things don't match up with what I'm saying, that's the reason. There's not really much I can do about it, sorry. Gay Paris is such an odd movie, and my feelings about it are so odd that I almost consider just striking it from the list, So the way I ranked a lot of these movies is as follows. Movies that bore me out of my mind, then below that, movies that I can enjoy ironically, but are still just realistically so awful, which have a whole tier to themselves, and then below that, this tier. The movies that are so bad and so boring that even the most objectively ridiculous garbage is still better than it. Thumbelina was the first one, and Gay Paris is the other one. I certainly don't hate this movie at all, but the experience of watching it is pretty much equivalent to watching paint dry, to the point where I didn't even finish it back when I first reviewed it. I don't think I could even tell you what it's about, because it's kind of about nothing. The white cat goes to Paris and gets exploited by a bunch of underhanded business cats. The orange cat and the cat with the weird name, it's like Arch Napoleon or something, go to rescue the white cat. And then after that, any semblance of plot completely falls apart, and they stop and sing a terrible song every 5 seconds, and at one point they watch this cat burlesque show and then get drunk and sing a song about that, which was the point where I stopped watching last time, and like, I don't know, that's all there is to say, really. I mean, I guess the art style is pretty unique, but certainly not unique enough for me to ever want to think about this movie ever again. I can't enjoy it because nothing happens. I can't ironically enjoy it because, again, nothing happens. And somehow it's so boring I can't even be bored by it. So little happens that boredom doesn't even feel like the right word. I feel like I'm being Dementor's kissed every time I even think about this movie. I genuinely struggle to find any words that describe how I feel about Gay Paris, and since I know 0 of you clicked on this video for this movie, I'm just gonna move on right now. Alright, now that we have those two out of the way, we can finally move on to the first official-ish tier of the video. F- tier. Ironically, amazing to watch. There are only 3 movies here, 2 more by Don Bluth and 1 by Disney, the worst Disney movie of all time, that are just so laughably awful that I would honestly happily watch all 3 of them again. I will not encourage you to stay away from these movies. Quite the opposite. These 3 films, if you can even call them that, are an absolute treat to watch, and especially force others to watch. Ultimate schadenfreude. Just watching your friends and family slowly lose their grip on their reality as it begins to dawn on them. This is real, and by far, the most absolutely insane of these movies is...
Hello, New York, New York, New York.
Hey, watch where you're going.
Watch where I'm going in New York.
New York, New York.
I've only been rendered speechless by a movie 3 times. Once was during the Angel of Death scene in The Prince of Egypt, another was during that one scene in Whisper of the Heart, and the third, a troll in Central Park. For the other 2 movies in this tier, I couldn't stop laughing, but for this movie, my jaw was on the floor for pretty much the entire runtime, because I seriously couldn't believe, understand, or even begin to comprehend what in God's name I was looking at. The beginning is nothing special, it just looks like your normal 2 or 3 out of 10 bad movie. There's an underground city of trolls, the Dom DeLuise troll has a green thumb that he uses to make talking plants, the hideous looking queen of the trolls is jealous and banishes him. You get a pretty good idea of the incredibly low quality animation and songs that we should expect to see, you know, the usual. As the movie that Don Bluth made right after Thumbelina, I knew that nothing was gonna come close to what I just watched, but it got a lot closer than I ever could have expected, because the main character troll gets banished to Central Park, but guess what's barely in the movie? Central Park. Soon enough, Dom DeLuise has fallen down a sewer, and 2 annoying-ass kids fall down shortly after. At this point, I had no idea where the movie was going, and it's no surprise that I didn't, because from this point forward, A Troll in Central Park ceases to be a feature film, and transforms entirely into an LSD-induced fever dream, with no cohesion whatsoever. The girl starts to cry, time for a 5-minute song of flowers singing, one of the worst songs I've ever heard. Then the boy starts crying, and the troll queen puts a curse on him to make his tears flood the cave that they're in. So then they escape on this boat which came out of literally nowhere. Oh no, there's a waterfall. Then the boat starts to fly. What? Where are we now? Why does this song sound so incredibly bad? What the hell is going on here?
Welcome to my world. There's such a lovely view. If you believe in dreams, then you will see it too.
Who came up? How the hell did something like this even get made? And by the way, it's only been 30 minutes. Don't get me wrong, all of this stuff is incredibly boring. It's approximately the third most boring experience you can have watching one of the films on this list, which is why it's ranked the lowest of these 3 F- tier movies. But is it still ironically enjoyable? Absolutely. Maybe not to watch by yourself, but to subject others to, which might be considered torture, but it's honestly worth the prison sentence if it is. Only a movie that made a whopping $71,000, yes, $1,000 at the box office, and was described by its director, Don Bluth, to be comparable to an infant's premature birth, could possibly achieve the things that this movie achieves. It's the only movie I've ever watched that is so inane 24/7 that it genuinely becomes uninteresting after a while. Even the most absurd stuff humanity has ever created and could possibly dream up stops eliciting a response from your brain after just like 20 minutes. The only thing you can do is sit there in shock with your brow furrowed as you try to feel anything or think anything, only to realize that you simply cannot and that you are no longer capable of complex thought. The movie has successfully brainwashed you and has turned you into a fragile husk of your former self. The more I think about it, the more it impresses me.
Women.
The Three Caballeros is undeniably the worst Disney movie ever, and it is the complete opposite of the last movie. I was not rendered speechless by a single thing in this absolute mess of a feature film. I don't think I stopped laughing for the entire last half of the movie, and by the last 20 minutes, I genuinely thought I was, like, dreaming. Couldn't even believe it. I was just trying to process the pure chaos of it all. I know that just going through the plot of the movie you're reviewing is the laziest way of doing this type of video, which I would know because it's the way I used to do it, but honestly, there is seriously no other way to fully comprehend the descent into madness that this movie takes. This might seem like deja vu because it is, but it actually starts out pretty normal. Donald is in this random limbo land and he gets this big present for his birthday, and inside of it is this video camera, which serves as the framing device for the first 2 shorts. The first one is narrated by Winnie the Pooh and follows the journey of Pablo the Penguin trying to escape Antarctica to go live in the Galapagos, only for his boat to melt because duh, and it's basically just a bunch of trying to survive antics, and you know what? I think it's fine. It's only the second best piece of Pablo the Penguin-centered entertainment I've seen, but it's also probably the only part of this movie with effort put into it. There's a quick thing going through some Latin American birds, then there's one narrated by the guy who narrated all of Saludos Amigos with this random kid who meets this flying donkey and enters a race and then stuff happens, and it's not very interesting. I remember liking that the narrator has the ability to change what the story looks like depending on what he says, but not much really actually happens, so whatever. The real thing that this short should be remembered for is being the barrier between the okay stuff and the oh my god stuff. Honestly, if they had kept up this Donald is watching all of the shorts through this camera gimmick through the whole movie and changed the name to something else, this had the potential to be fine, or as fine as any of the other World War II package films, but that's not what happened. Donald proceeds to open his second present, a pop-up book, and in a hole in the book, there lived a Joe. We have now met our second Caballero, and so things quickly become about 2 times more absolutely insane, as Joe takes Donald inside the book to a place called Bahia, which is supposedly the best place ever, and it immediately becomes clear why. This is Yaya. Yaya is live action, and Donald is somewhat attracted to Yaya. I don't think I can even fully get into the weirdness of this scene without going even more in depth than I already am, which I just don't want to do. Luckily, I have no qualms asking you to watch this movie because I know for a fact that you will have an amazing time. But don't worry, because believe it or not, you've seen nothing yet. Donald proceeds to open his third present, and in a hole in this present, there lived a Panchito. We have now met our third Caballero, and so things quickly become You guessed it, 10,000 times more absolutely insane. We spent like 15-ish minutes exploring some Mexican culture and a combination of animation and live action, and I can't really tell if it's accurate or not, but it honestly doesn't matter too much because it's not what anyone remembers this film for, because then our three gay caballeros, which is an actual line in the song they sing, decide to venture into the real live-action world and explore all of the natural beauties it has to offer. The reason I phrased it as natural beauties is because, well, and let me tell you, once the folks at Disney got their hands on the technology that made it possible for Donald Duck to ogle women, they couldn't stop using it. The last 20 minutes of this movie are beyond words, somehow more insane than anything a troll in Central Park could possibly throw at us, like an abstract short from Fantasia, but replace the sugar plum fairies and dancing flowers with a sombrero-wearing rooster with a live-action lady's legs. The insanity takes every form you could possibly imagine. There are women dressed up as flowers, women dressed up as cacti, women dressed up in swimsuits, women just dressed up as women. It doesn't matter. These three clearly not gay caballeros will take any women they can get, and it's one of the funniest things I have ever seen. I haven't the slightest clue, not even an inkling, how any part of this movie was made, greenlit, whatever, without someone in charge saying, wait a minute, this is our goodwill message to Latin America? A Troll in Central Park is fun to show to your friends, but The Three Caballeros is fun to watch with your friends. You will never have a bad memory watching this absolute mess, and that's exactly what makes it so terrible. I love it.
Gimme some time to think.
I think Rock-a-Doodle might be the crowning achievement of the human race. It's yet another Don Bluth classic, yet another bad movie that is such a failure in every possible way that you can't even fathom where some of the ideas behind it came from. Everything about this movie is just so wrong. The story is wrong. Chanticleer is this rooster who sings so magnificently that he thinks his voice is what makes the sun rise, but when he realizes that it doesn't, he's so embarrassed that he leaves the farm and goes to the big city to become Elvis. But then the sun stops rising, so all of the other animals on the farm have to go track him down and make him come back and sing again, so that the owls who thrive in darkness don't take over and eat them all or something. It doesn't really matter, because why did the sun stop rising? The only thing the movie has established is that Chanticleer can't do that. But even putting all of that aside, now the rest of the movie is these characters who we know nothing about and couldn't care less about, trying to save a character who we know nothing about and couldn't care less about, from a situation we know nothing about and couldn't care less about. If it wasn't for all of the ridiculous crap that Don Bluth threw in, this would be one of the most boring and miserable experiences on the whole list. But that's not what he did. Instead, he gave us an absolute masterpiece. The characters are wrong. Not only do we not care about any of them, but there are just so many, and quite a few of them only contribute to the story in occasional comments about one of the female characters, and one in particular is that female character, but don't worry, we'll get to that. Seriously though, considering that this was the movie Bluth made right before Thumbelina, it kinda feels like a warm-up act in a lot of ways, but specifically in the sexism department.
Fortunately for us, Goldie was a lot smarter than she sounded.
What happened?
She's a woman.
Also, I've never seen a character more telling of the director's hidden fetishes than Goldie Pheasant, whose only contribution to this motion picture is a couple of scenes that just really make you go, oh my god. Plus, the villains I guess aren't interesting either, but big surprise. The songs are also wrong. To be fair, a lot of the ones Chanticleer sings kind of slap, and I'm sure if the movie had more that were actually full length, and didn't get talked over every 10 seconds, there probably would have been more that I liked, but alas, we're just forced to watch at least 5, like 30-second songs. I can confidently play one now in its entirety without worrying about copyright. Watch, I'm gonna do it.
Twiddly-dee. Twiddly-dee. They're running out. They're running out. They're running out of batteries. No batteries.
You see what I mean? That's the entire song, and to be honest, it's just as fragmented as the rest of the movie. Even the animation is wrong, because for some goddamn reason, like 20 minutes in, we zoom out of the story to some live-action kid reading the story, but then he proceeds to get sucked into the story when the characters show up at his house. So I don't even know how that's supposed to work. Apart from this kid's amazing acting, literally what reason do you have to put this in the movie? It's not even like it's awful, or even the worst part of the film, but like, why? Why is this here? Like, Rockadoodle is still pretty enjoyable to watch, but not in a laugh-out-loud kind of way, more like in a Troll in Central Park way, except instead of the soul leaving your body as the movie goes along, more soul enters your body as you feel more and more alive, as you become more and more convinced that if this movie was made, I could make a movie. If this movie exists, I can do anything, which is precisely why I have it as the third and last, ironically brilliant animated movie from the 20th century. But unfortunately, that means we're back to the irredeemable pieces of garbage now. F tier. Agonizingly boring and or annoying. Not quite Thumbelina bad, but still pretty awful. The movies that make me feel the most dead inside while watching, or just irk me in some way, even if they don't make me outright mad. There are a few sort of controversial ones sprinkled in here, but the tier is 12 movies long, so it'll be a vast majority of certified bad movies. Starting with, or you know what, why don't you guess? Guess which director made the next movie. It's Don Bluth. Of course it's goddamn Don Bluth. I'm pretty sure the only thing anyone remembers about All Dogs Go to Heaven today is that one moment that you might have heard about. You know, the one with the big-lipped alligator. Its name is escaping me at the moment, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. But honestly, that's fair enough, because this scene is the only part of this movie that deserves to be remembered. It's the only part of the entire film where I felt any life inside of my body. Thumbelina is objectively worse, but I can probably say that this might be the most boring movie I've ever seen in my entire life. Nothing about it is good. I like the world full of dogs, but I dislike every single dog in it. I think the demons from hell look okay, I guess, and heaven doesn't look too bad either, but every character design, except for the big-lipped alligator, kinda sucks. The idea of a dog stealing his life watch from heaven and trying to keep it safe is pretty cool, but every single thing that the main character, whose name I've already forgotten, does while trying to keep it safe is uninteresting and totally incoherent. Part of what made this movie so hard to watch was the simple fact that I never knew where it was going, which is fine in some cases, but not in this movie's case, because I highly doubt it was by design to like misdirect the audience. This isn't Clue, this is All Dogs Go to Heaven, and I never knew where it was going, because everyone who wrote the movie probably didn't know where it was going. I love Don Bluth's first two movies, and his third is okay too. Even his last couple managed to be decently good. But his middle four, of which this is the first and highest ranked, all feel so creatively bankrupt, utterly confused, and as a result, boring as hell. That's an All Dogs Go to Heaven reference in case you didn't know. Sure, the big-lipped alligator moment is absolutely insane, but even though it would have made the movie worse overall, you have no idea how much I would have preferred it if the entire thing was like this. Because in this incredibly specific scenario, worse doesn't necessarily mean worse. I would much rather watch Big Lipped Alligator the movie, because at least that would guarantee entertainment, something this movie just has absolutely none of. Don't worry, we'll be taking a break from Don Bluth for like 10 movies or so, but like, how sad is it that out of the bottom 6 movies on this list, 4 of them are his? Like, I love you, man, and I'm so glad you exist because you made a couple of movies that I happen to think are really great, but damn, bro, that's just rough.
Where are you going, General George?
I'm off to fight at Valley.
Of the 12 movies that Studio Ghibli made before 2000, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is my least favorite, and that's because I just don't get it. Not in the sense that I don't get what about the movie people like, but in the sense that I don't get what the movie is just about. I should also clarify that technically this isn't a Studio Ghibli movie and it was made by like some other studio. It doesn't matter. It's a Miyazaki movie, like it's basically a Ghibli movie. This is based off a manga that Miyazaki wrote, and I think when he made this movie, he was kind of assuming that most people who would watch this movie had already read some of it or were at least acquainted with it. And as a result, this film doesn't really go out of its way to explain much of what's happening, instead opting to make 2 hours of action scene, talking scene, action scene, talking scene over and over again, except the talking scenes were mostly just people who were expected to already kind of know, name-dropping places that were expected to already kind of be familiar with, and the action scenes were just kind of boring to me because I was too busy trying to piece together who was fighting and why they were fighting and what had even happened up until this point in the story. Now, this isn't a serious criticism of the movie. It seems like a pretty smart choice to do this if you know that your target audience does know and is familiar with those things, because why waste time exploring the relationships between all of these random ideas if the people watching your movie already have previous knowledge of them and just want to see the action scenes? This isn't something wrong with the movie, it's just the reason I don't like it. If I was part of this movie's target audience, I'm sure I'd like it a lot, or at least a lot more. The animation looks pretty good. Now, as the first Studio Ghibli adjacent movie I watched, I had no frame of reference for whether or not this was actually good animation. But no, it's just as amazing as every other movie the company made. The settings are beautiful. The little village with the windmills is really charming. The toxic forest being mainly blue was a cool choice to show how alien it is, and all of the weird creatures that live in the forest have really interesting designs too, especially the Omu, I don't really know how to pronounce any of this, which are just such a unique and well-developed creature. They're probably the only part of the movie that I fully understood, and as a result, I actually really liked them. Plus, the music is absolutely beautiful. At the time, I had no idea that Joe Hisaishi went this hard on every movie he composed for, but it's still no less impressive to me now how one guy can write music so well in so many different genres and manage to perfectly encapsulate what a song can do with every single piece he writes. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is not a bad movie, but it just really was not made for me, especially because fantasy, dystopia, whatever movies like this aren't really my thing anyway. In fact, it was made for me to such a small degree that combined with the 2-hour runtime, it really had no chance of ranking any higher than this. The Ghibli movies are usually longer anyway, and so when they don't work for me, they end up becoming a 2-hour slog on the complete opposite end of the list as all of the others. One more of the 12 Ghibli movies on this list ranks in this tier for the same reason, and another of the 12 ranks in this tier because it just straight up sucks. But the other 9 I still think are good, so don't hate me just yet.
Whoa, the colors, man.
For a long time, my only exposure to Fantasia was during elementary school music class when sometimes we would watch specific clips from the movie. We only ever really got around to watching like 6 though, and we would just rewatch those 6 over and over again. One of them was The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and I've since learned that the other 5 are all just different parts of the Nutcracker suite. And now that I've watched this movie in its entirety, and then watched it in its entirety again for this video, I can now completely understand why. Because they're the only parts of this movie ever worth watching. Just like the last one, this is a long-ass movie, and since the vast majority of it has less plot than pretty much anything else on this whole list, I was never really gonna like it that much. I figure the best way to accurately cover everything in this movie is to just do a little mini ranking where I put every segment from worst to best, which is what I'm gonna be doing for most of the ones that are collections of shorts. Now, I won't be ranking the Deems Taylor stuff, which kind of just bogs down the runtime, and also how would I even rank that? And since there are so many distinct parts in the Nutcracker suite, instead of ranking that whole thing as just one segment, I'll rank each individual part, which I feel like makes more sense. Starting with unlucky number 13, Pastoral Symphony. And it's very fitting that it's unlucky, because this is one of the most boring things I've ever watched in my entire life. All of the designs except for Dionysus's are absolutely god-awful, pun intended. There's no plot at all, and we're basically just watching centaur mating rituals and Pegasi drinking water for literally 25 minutes. The music is so absolutely nothing that sometimes I almost forgot it was on, which is literally the whole point of the movie. Maybe pick something else then? Pick a Scheherezade song. The Thief and the Cobbler did that and made my favorite animated scene of all time. Just don't do this. Also, I should probably mention this absolutely horrific, god-awful black stereotype centaur that was so poorly aged that even Disney's little warning that they put at the start of all these old movies couldn't justify the inclusion of it on Disney+. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was so bad that they cut it out before the movie even made it to theaters originally, in like 1942. Civil rights movement was in like the 1960s. It was that bad. There's nothing of value here, and I literally became that scene of Max and his girlfriend on the train from that one Twice Upon a Christmas short while watching it. Number 12. Rite of Spring. This one details the history of the dinosaurs and somehow makes it boring. I get that they didn't want to make it too crazy because at the time people were already pissed that Disney would dare to spit in the face of creationism by making this short that suggested that evolution was a thing, but like, that doesn't really change anything for me. There's a nice shot of a galaxy at the start, and there are some really good-looking lava effects, but for like 20 minutes, we're just looking at some surprisingly colorless-looking big lizards doing basically nothing, and it kinda sucks. I'm not gonna lie, if I lived in 1940 and I watched this movie, this would probably make me more creationist. Number 11, Night on Bald Mountain / Ave Maria. I don't even hate this one. It's just not the greatest. Chernobog has a sweet design, and I'm glad that they toned down their religion to a reasonable degree. Both of the songs are pretty okay too. I like that the nuns are basically just balls of light, and I think that the entire movie ending with the sunrise is some cool symbolism. Plus the sheer variety of different demons that come out of this mountain definitely make this a bit easier to sit through, although it does feel sort of slow by the end, but it's definitely way better than the previous two, because this one at least had parts that I enjoyed watching, which was not the case for those. Number 10, Dance of the Hours. Probably the best of the 4 long shorts, just because it's satire. The whole thing is just parodying ballet, and I kinda like what they did with it. I mean, pretty much any sort of animated short over 15 minutes with no talking or plot is gonna rank pretty low for me no matter what, because it's just not something I'm ever gonna be interested in, but this seems like a best case scenario. I like that I recognize the hippos and crocodiles from that one short in Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas, and these ostriches have one of the most perfect designs Disney has ever concocted. I don't know, overall it's really not that bad, and it's certainly nowhere near as obnoxious as Pastoral Symphony. Also, can we acknowledge that I just mentioned Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas twice in like 3 minutes? That wasn't even intentional. Number 9, Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Is it Toccata or Toccata? Doesn't matter. It reminds me of one of those Windows Media Player backgrounds, which is pretty much the definition of random abstract nonsense. And yeah, that's all this is. It's only this high because it's like 10 minutes. Number 8, the soundtrack one, which is just an ethereal guitar string being plucked in a bunch of different ways. It's basically the same idea as the last one, but 4 times shorter, which is fine by me. Number 7, the Arabian Dance. The only part of the Nutcracker Suite I had never previously seen, which I don't really mind because it's the worst part. It's just some fish fishing around, they do some weird dance with their tails, and Disney on some level definitely tried to sexualize these fish, which is a bit odd. Odds fish, if you will. Also, I can't tell if this is racist or not. I guess this one isn't awful, but it's definitely the weakest song and animation out of any of the Nutcracker ones. Number 6, Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies. Obviously the song is great, which I'm pretty sure is why they put this one in the movie in the first place, but the visuals are actually really nice too. I enjoy being able to tell what I'm looking at. Plus, fairies adding dew to spider webs and flowers is just a cool idea. Not super complicated, and not the best this movie has to offer, but still pretty nice. Number 5, the Chinese Dance. Now, I hate to put this one so high considering how omega racist it is, but damn it, as a kid, we didn't know that these were offensive Asian stereotypes. We just thought they were cute dancing mushrooms, and I'm having a hard time reconciling my current knowledge of what this part of the movie is actually saying, and my memories of laughing with my friends and the other kids in my class at what we thought this part was saying. I mean, if we put racism to the side, can we at least all agree that the music is good? The mushrooms are cute, damn it, and racism is bad. Don't be racist, but the mushrooms are still really cute. Anyway, number 4, Dance of the Reed Flutes. Choreography-wise, nothing special is really happening here. It's just some flowers floating around a pond. But let's give them credit. There's some very delightful looking flowers, and they go down a waterfall at some point, and that's cool. Plus, this song slaps. Honestly, the whole Nutcracker suite gets carried by the songs. Also, take that, modern Disney. A gay person's music is now in one of your movies. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't even make it short enough to cut out for international releases. Also, why is this one not set to Waltz of the Flowers? It literally has dancing flowers. Number 3, Russian dance. I guess they have those Russian hats on, but compared to the other racism that we just saw about 10 minutes previously with the dancing mushrooms, this is pretty tame. I like the line dancing approach, the music is obviously great, and this overall feels like the best version of a short depicting some dancing flowers we could have gotten. This is one of the most energy-filled parts of the whole movie. Number 2, Waltz of the Flowers. Again, this song should have been the one with the waltzing flowers, but what do I know? It's another one with fairies doing stuff, but this time they're turning the forest from summer to autumn and then to winter, which is a slightly cooler idea than just adding drops of water to flowers. There are just more cool details here because there's just more going on. This is probably also my favorite of the Tchaikovsky songs, but don't hold me to that. I like that he dedicated this song to his favorite rosebush, and I think it's interesting that I can never think of this piece of music now without thinking of that Model Citizen short by Dead Sound on YouTube. Point is, with the exception of the fish one, the Nutcracker Suite does just get better as it goes along. I don't remember if that's what I thought last time, but it's what I think now, and what I used to think no longer matters for this series. And number 1, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Everyone knew this was going to be first. This is one of the most iconic things that's ever been made by not just Disney, but anyone. This is unironically one of the crowning achievements of humankind and something everyone should see. Everything about it is perfect. It's the only short in this movie where the music was written to fit the plot and not the other way around, and it ended up creating one of the best stories and one of the best songs literally of all time. There's nothing I even really have to say. You have eyes, you have ears, you can tell. Fantasia has a lot of truly great stuff in it, but that great stuff makes up about a quarter of the movie. The other 3/4 are pure boredom. Like, I only dislike the bottom 4 shorts, and even 2 of those 4 shorts I don't even really dislike, but like, those bottom 4 are about triple to quadruple the length of all the others. I'm not one to kick back and watch a relaxing 2 hours of dinosaurs going extinct played over Mozart. That just isn't my thing, and if anything, this second rewatch has just cemented my opinion that the best way to experience this movie is the way I did for the very first time back in kindergarten, with most of it cut out. I'm very glad this movie was made. The following movies on this list would probably be drastically different if it wasn't, and I do kind of hope we get a Fantasia 100 at some point for 100 years of Disney, even though I kind of know Disney's era of creativity may or may not be on the way out for a while. I'm happy this movie is a thing, but I still don't like it, and it's still mostly boring. Sorry.
I'm hunting rabbits.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit is one of those movies where you either like it or you don't. I don't. I think the technology behind mixing live action with animation still holds up pretty well all these years later. They're able to do a lot of cool things with it, and a lot of the visual gags and jokes work pretty well. The story is fine, the characters are fine, Jessica Rabbit is... what are you waiting for me to say? The villain is kind of stupid, but this is a stupid movie, so it doesn't matter. A lot of the sets are pretty good, there are a ton of cool Easter eggs, and overall, there's just a lot to like about this movie, and I don't like it. I just think it's really boring. There was no point during the entire runtime where I was ever really interested in anything that was going on, and by the end, I was kind of struggling to keep my eyes open, and I watched this at like 11 a.m., so that's not a good sign. If you like this movie, I totally get it, there's a lot to like here, but if you don't like this movie, I totally get it way more, because I don't like it. I don't even have much to say on this one. It's just kind of boring to me, but that's kind of what happens when you make an uninteresting movie that approaches 2 hours in length.
Can I put my balls way down deep inside your jaw?
Hey look, another uninteresting movie approaching 2 hours in length. Yeah, Pompoko is that other Ghibli movie I was talking about that overstays its welcome by quite a lot. In fact, in retrospect, it's one of the least confident movies I've ever seen. By that, I mean that it feels the need to hammer its message home in exactly the same way over and over again for 2 hours straight, because I guess it wasn't sure it made itself clear the first time. Spoiler alert, it was, but that didn't stop it from pressing on and repeating itself like 5 or 6 more times. So basically, this is a movie about some shape-shifting raccoons with magical balls that use their powers to defend their forest from the humans. Except for the balls thing, which makes a lot of scenes very odd and uncomfortable to watch, this is a pretty good concept for a movie, and the initial groundwork for it was pretty interesting to see. The first 30 minutes or so were actually very enjoyable, and I liked seeing the raccoons organize and come up with a plan and learn to use their powers and start executing their plan. But then something interesting happened. Interesting things stopped happening, because the next 80 minutes, I swear to God, were the exact same movie that we just watched. We pretty much get the themes and the messages at this point, and if they were to expand on those messages, then fine, go ahead. I'll happily keep watching, as long as you give me a reason to. But for pretty much the entire film after this, it's just come up with a plan, prepare for the plan, execute the plan, celebrate the success of the plan, realize that the plan didn't actually work as well as they hoped, come up with a new plan, and it keeps going for over an hour and a half longer. Some of the plans offer some cool stuff, like the scene where the raccoons shapeshift into a bunch of genuinely terrifying things to scare all of the humans. It's basically the Ghibli version of the pink elephant scene, and it was really cool to see the animators just go off and do something weird. But those good elements were few and far between. There are scenes an entire hour apart that could take place within seconds of each other. For about 95% of the runtime, it just feels like you're watching that image of the snake eating its tail in movie form. Just never-ending sludge, and it creates one of the most monotonous experiences on the whole list. Like, as much as I hate Thumbelina, its form of boredom is not derived from being too monotonous. The only part of this movie that I think was genuinely worth watching was the very end, which just so happens to be when it finally decided to actually do something new. Shocker. After 2 hours of pointless resistance against the humans, the raccoons kind of just lose. The forest gets totally destroyed, the humans take over everything, the raccoons either die, adapt to living in the sewers and eating trash, or take up lives as humans, always being shapeshifted into the form of their enemies to stay alive. Some just live normal human lives, but others end up working for companies that tear down forests, becoming just as bad as the people they were trying to stop to begin with. I really wasn't expecting the Animal Farm approach to ending this movie, and the whole last 5 minutes or so were a lot more bleak than I was expecting, and honestly, more power to the film for that. It's really just what it needed to make me remember anything about what it was trying to say, especially after 2 hours of the same 4 scenes played on repeat beforehand. There's other good stuff too, I guess. The forest looks really beautiful, and it reminds me a lot of the forest from Bambi, just more detailed. The music is really calming, and the raccoon transformations look really fluid and nice, although whenever those transformations involve their balls, that kind of works against them. An F-tier amount of effort was not put into this movie, but a lot of the effort that was put in the wrong places. And by the wrong places, I mean the exact same place many, many times. The first 30 minutes and the last 5 are worth checking out, and the haunted Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade scene is good too, but the rest really kinda sucks. And it sucks that it sucks, but it still sucks.
I'm playing as a woman! Don't sound so disgusted! But I hate—
The Black Cauldron is widely considered to be Disney's lowest point, and honestly, I tend to agree with that. This is another one of those movies that's kind of irritating in how boring it is. There certainly is a plot, but it's so dry and confusing and riddled with plot holes and full of obnoxious and stupid characters that it doesn't exactly improve the movie. The only thing that I like about it at all is the animation, which actually looks pretty good. All of the effects that aren't CGI are also pretty good, and all of the settings and backgrounds, especially the Horn King's castle, look seriously amazing. The character designs don't exactly, and all of the main characters look and act like characters from the Wheel of Time, which I'm happy to announce I've officially given up reading after 7 books out of 14, and honestly, it was for all of the reasons why I dislike this movie so much. It's a boring fantasy story that's more focused on plot than having actually good characters, and everyone is kind of just miserable all the time and says sexist stuff every so often, and it just sucks up all of your energy very quickly and puts you in an incredibly bad mood. I could go into detail about why this movie is boring and why the plot is uninteresting, but you either know that already or have a pretty good idea of why, and if neither of those apply to you, trust me, any more of your life spent thinking about this movie is utterly wasted. Just take my word for it. Honestly, the fact that the main villain is defeated by just standing too close to the Black Cauldron and none of the protagonists had anything to do with it sums up all you need to know about this absolute mess of a film. Again, what is there to say?
Picture a wave. It's there, and you can see it. You know what it is. It's a wave. It's a wave. It's a wave.
Get over there!
It's not ranked lowest, but Ocean Waves is undeniably the worst Ghibli movie from the 20th century. It's honestly not even close. Since I just watched this movie in late August, early September of last year, my opinions on it are still pretty much the same, and so you really can just watch my previous segment on this movie if you want to know more. but I'll still talk a little about it here, because if I'm already making a video this long, what reason do I have to not go all out on it? Especially for movies like this that truly deserve to be talked about and made fun of and ridiculed for hours on end. Imagine the worst parts of every terrible fanfiction, every high school movie, every love triangle movie, every kissing booth movie that you've ever seen, smush it all together, and then translate it to Japanese, and now you have Ocean Waves. The main girl in this movie that everyone likes has to be the most arrogant and unlikable character in this entire series. I'm serious. When I said Thumbelina was the only movie that ever made me angry, I'm not gonna lie, I think I was forgetting about this one. The pure conceit that this character exudes is genuinely infuriating, and she's not the only one. Both of these friends supposedly had a whole bunch of gay subtext, but there was one scene where we had the chance to get some, and they cut away like the cowards they are. The rest of the scenes are either them sitting in a room silently and being told how good of friends they are via a voiceover, or fighting over this girl who no one should like in the first place. It's really what makes this movie so miserable to watch. All three of the main characters are horrible human beings, granted to very different degrees, and they all just make each other worse. They all bring out the worst parts of each other, except for the girl, who's always the worst version of herself and can't possibly get any worse if she tried. The fact that there's a scene where she slaps one of the guys, and so he, I kid you not, this is real, proceeds to slap her back in the middle of the school hallway, full strength, should speak volumes about how wrong this movie is. It's not portrayed as right, but it's not portrayed as bad either. It's treated the same as two guys just punching each other around like, oh, they were just mad at each other, even though it's just not the same, nor has it ever been. Honestly, I do highly recommend for this particular movie that you should just watch my 5 or 6 minute segment on it in episode 11, because I don't think I could have said it any better than I did there. The more I think about it, the more I honestly just loathe this movie and everything that it stands for. It has terrible messages, literally not a single ocean wave, and the most anger-inducing character on this entire list, along with 2 more who aren't far behind. There's nothing I like except like one piece of music, and it doesn't even feel real that it was directed by Studio Ghibli. At least we won't be seeing any more Ghibli content for about 30 more movies, because I don't want to think about this godforsaken film or anything related to it for a while.
Bro, what was the point of that movie?
Sword in the Stone is one of the most pointless feeling movies I've ever watched. If I told you that Disney made a movie about King Arthur as a kid pulling the sword out of the stone and becoming king, and you knew nothing about the movie's actual content or quality, you'd probably think, wow, that seems pretty interesting. But what if I then told you that he doesn't become king until 3 minutes left, and the sword or the stone don't even show up until 5 minutes left? So what on earth could this movie be about? The answer is nothing. The Sword in the Stone is not about anything. This film is just Merlin doing magic things and turning Arthur into various animals for over an hour, and it's so painfully boring. Sure, turning into a fish is a cool idea, but they never do anything cool with it. And then after that, he turns into a squirrel, where the only conflict is Squirrel Merlin, Squirrelin if you will, trying not to get assaulted by a bunch of horny lady squirrels. What a great concept. What a great movie. And then Arthur gets turned into a bird where I don't even remember what happens then. The whole thing is just so dry and dull that I've already forgotten everything that happens. Merlin claims he's doing this to like teach Arthur something, but in what situation would you ever need to know how to fly? The only good part is Madam Mim just because we get a cool magic battle, and even though it's still not very interesting, at least it's something, and for the last hour, I've been totally deprived of everything and anything. And it's also very telling that despite the last hour of lessons, Arthur is still incapable of helping Merlin in this battle in any way, shape, or form. He just stands on the sidelines, silently reminding the audience that everything they've been watching has been for nothing. It'd be one thing if all of these pointless animal hijinks had any bearing on the sword or the stone, but they don't, like, at all. Merlin gets pissed off at Arthur for no reason and leaves. Then Arthur and his family go to London just coincidentally. Arthur's brother coincidentally doesn't have his sword, and Arthur coincidentally goes looking for another one, finds the sword in the stone, and for some reason decides to pull it out. Then he becomes king, Merlin comes back for no reason, and the movie ends. So, like, Nothing except the last 10 minutes of the film had any bearing on the plot, or even any bearing on the sword in the stone, which, may I remind you, is what the movie is called. Plenty of old Disney movies meander around with their plots, but the difference is that that meandering was sort of interesting and meant something. This is one of the most nothing movies Disney has ever made, and Arthur is one of the most nothing protagonists Disney has ever made. The only interesting thing about him is how his voice changes about 80 times throughout the movie.
I pulled it out of an anvil that was on a stone in a churchyard.
I mean, I like Merlin quite a bit, and I like his owl Archimedes and how he just doesn't care about anything. And even though there's a bunch of repeated animation in some places, I still think the Xerox process, which is the animation process that gives us all of these pencil lines, doesn't completely fail here. The character designs all look pretty terrible, and it makes all of these animal shenanigans even more boring, but I think the backgrounds are honestly pretty good. And Arthur's castle house actually looks really cool. I'd want to live here, but none of that stuff is really enough to save this movie for me, because every single good thing about it is done, and usually way better, in other Disney movies. The only thing about this film that it genuinely has all to itself is the overwhelming feeling of uselessness and what was the point of that I felt when I watched it. And there may be a reason that future Disney movies weren't too eager to take that uniqueness away.
Eric, move! Oh, nice trolley. Out of the way! I can't, Cheaty. My boots are stuck in the track.
Cruella de Vil was gonna be the villain in The Rescuers, but that ended up not happening because Disney was opposed to sequels. Well, Disney, I hope you feel stupid now that you went ahead and made a sequel to that very movie that's infinitely worse in every way. I feel very little need to talk about The Rescuers Down Under for any length of time. It's made absolutely zero impact on me, and I doubt it's made any impact on anybody else either. Both main characters are worse, and they feel like they have no need to even be in the story. I like that Bernard keeps trying to propose to Bianca and it keeps not working, because that's always a trope that's sort of fun to see. But then they meet this Australian park ranger mouse who Bernard is jealous of because of his dashing good looks, and goofy hijinks ensue, which is a trope that is decidedly less fun to see. The kid that they're trying to rescue has so much less personality than the kid from the first movie, and it doesn't exactly help that the only thing he ever does is make stupid decisions that set everybody back 10 steps for every 1 step forward. The villain is kind of a blank slate too. He doesn't really carry the same threatening energy as Medusa, and you can tell because I don't even know his name, and even though I think his goal of capturing this elusive bird works on paper, I don't really think it's executed the best. It never feels like there are any stakes, and so I was never really invested in what was going on, and so I was just kind of bored the whole time. There's just so much less substance here than there was in the last movie. So much of the runtime just feels like filler obstacles Disney decided to throw in because they couldn't think of anything else related to the actual plot to put in. None of the other side characters we meet are very interesting, and none of the action scenes are super engaging either, especially compared to that amazing organ scene from the original movie. And even though Australia looks absolutely beautiful in some places, which is actually the only thing I like here, so many of the set pieces they chose are just so dismal and bland, which to be fair is an issue I had with the original also because it took place in that swamp, but it feels even worse now, because in this movie we see parts of the exact same setting that look infinitely better, and Disney still chose to put the majority of the movie in dark little rooms. The nice looking parts and the bad looking parts are no longer separated by hundreds of miles. It's all just one place, and the nice looking parts are just abandoned for the bad looking parts, and that really sucks. Although I do still think that the animation as a whole is pretty good. That scene in particular at the beginning where unnamed kid is riding on the eagle's back is genuinely really great, and one of the better scenes that Disney has made. A lot of the forested parts that we see toward the start look pretty nice too, but like I said, I don't know if that's really enough to make up for all of the brown and gray that we see for more than half the movie after that. I don't know, the more I think about it, the more I realize that this movie seriously does not have a single reason to exist. It's by far the worst movie from the Disney Renaissance, to the point where I don't even know if you can call it part of the Disney Renaissance. This is the Disney Bronze Age movie that never was, and honestly, that statement kind of tells you all you need to know about it. I wasn't really expecting to put it down in F tier, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there's genuinely no reason I would ever want to come back to it. It has legitimately no soul whatsoever, and every time I think about it, I can practically feel the Dementors sucking the happiness out of my body. That's the second time I've made that joke in this video, but like, this movie isn't even good enough to make me come up with a new joke for it. I don't know, this one is kind of just a huge bummer.
Imagine you're a deer. You're prancing along, you get thirsty, you spot a little brook, you put your little dear lips down to the cool, clear water.
Wow, Bambi is really not for me. I mean, a lot of old Disney movies are more focused on charm and just giving the audience cartoon-esque entertainment, just because that's what audiences were used to at the time, and that's something we'll discuss more when we get to Snow White and adjacent movies in like 50 hours. Point is, a lot of these first Disney movies don't really put plot as their first priority, but at least they put it as a priority. Bambi, however, feels like the only card it's able to play is the cuteness card, and it hardly even does that. So little happens, and it just kind of stunts the movie and makes it really difficult for me to care about what's going on. Sure, I think Bambi is cute. I liked Thumper for a while. The frolicking in the forest was enjoyable for some amount of time. But the reason that the now something sort of random is going to happen moments worked in other movies is because there were moments of actual plot to break them up. Snow White has plenty of moments with no bearing on anything, but you can still give me a pretty detailed plot synopsis of the movie. The movie still had forward momentum. Things still happen. The same is true for Pinocchio, or Dumbo, or Cinderella. However, if I ask you the same thing about Bambi, every single one of you will say the same thing. Bambi's mom dies. You know why? Because it's the only part of the movie where plot actually happens. And so even though the characters are cute, all of their cuteness stops feeling impactful very quickly because it very quickly becomes obvious that, oh wait, literally nothing else is going to happen in this movie, is it? Things do sort of change toward the end once all of the characters grow up. Cuteness now isn't a factor, and so some plot does kind of happen if you want to count Bambi falling in love and then watching the forest burn down as plot, but it's kinda too little too late. For the first 50 minutes, the most interesting thing that happens is the season changing from spring to winter. Sure, the forest looks pretty nice, and the scene where Bambi's mom dies is not really that sad, but still. And even though the movie really does fail to be cute for most of their runtime, there are still plenty of nice moments sprinkled throughout. I just don't really care though, and most of my viewing experience was just me sitting on the couch with no emotion on my face, resting my head on my hand, pausing every 2 minutes to see how much longer I had to watch, which is like, not a sign of a good movie.
Okay, Mitch, I will see you around.
Are you going to the Christmas tree lighting ceremony at Town Square?
Yes, I will be there.
Of the 6 direct-to-VHS Disney sequels on this list, the 2 Beauty and the Beast ones are in 6th and 5th place. On the one hand, that could be because Beauty and the Beast is a great movie, and so anything that doesn't live up to it will look unfairly bad. Or alternatively, that could be because they're both ass. Beauty and the Beast: The Enchanted Christmas probably isn't even the worst one. Belle's Magical World is an abject failure in every way, and clearly had infinitely less effort put into it, yet this one is still ranked lower. Why? Because it is a Christmas special, and that just feels more insulting than any low-effort sequel could possibly be. For any movies reviewed in episodes 9 through 12, which this one is, my opinions and video making ability are mostly equal to what they are now, so if you want to check out a more detailed explanation of why this movie hurts my feelings in this way, it's the 3rd movie in episode 9. There's just something that feels especially fake about Christmas specials. I say that as if it's impossible to figure out what it is. No, everyone knows exactly what it is. It's all of the stupid comments that all of the characters make. You don't like Christmas? But Christmas is the most magical time of year. Putting presents under the tree, leaving milk and cookies out for Santa, singing Christmas carols. I could go on, but I guarantee I've reminded each and every one of you of at least 20 other movies. So not only is this movie kind of boring, it's also sort of irritating, because all of these characters that I have an emotional connection to from my childhood are now just mouthpieces for Christmas spirit instead of actual people with actual personalities. There is a point in this movie where Belle goes out into the forest at night to find the perfect Christmas tree because she's determined to decorate the castle, even though the Beast hates Christmas. Then she falls through the ice on a lake and almost drowns, and the Beast has to save her, and he carries her back to the castle with this one shot that looks straight out of Frankenstein, and then he locks Belle in the dungeon, telling her that she will rot there forever until he finally opens the gift that Belle got him and realizes the true meaning of Christmas, and they all live happily ever after. The only way this could possibly get any more cliche and stupid is if this was somehow a betweenquel instead of a sequel that essentially took place between scenes of the original movie. Oh wait, that's exactly what this is. There are okay things about this movie. I think the animation is still genuinely good, not as good as the original obviously, but the castle still looks decent and the character designs are still okay. It looks like a real movie, which is something I cannot say for the other Beauty and the Beast betweenquel. And I absolutely adore the villain, and that's 100% because he's played by Tim Curry, who, if you don't know, is a huge part of the lore of this series.
So, nerd, I hear you want to be a big ladies' man.
Tim Curry is a talking church organ, and his whole motivation is that he doesn't want Belle and the Beast to fall in love, because then the spell will be broken, and the Beast won't come to him to get therapy anymore. Even though there is a definitive time limit for how long everyone can survive as talking objects before the last petal falls, and they all die, which he somehow never realizes for the entire movie. But it's fine, because he's still the only good part of the film.
They can't fall in love if they're dead!
I did not edit that clip at all, yet not even Tim Curry can save this absolute abomination. Like I said, this is still realistically better than the other Beauty and the Beast sequel, but it annoys me so much more. The idea that Disney put objectively more effort into this and still had the temerity to make it this bad is just unacceptable.
Stop that. That's racist. What? What is racist about it?
Pocahontas may not be the worst animated movie from the 20th century, but we all knew that it would make F tier. What a failure of a film. One of the only Disney movies that was made exclusively to be Oscar bait, and it messed up so miserably that it's widely regarded as one of the worst, not just Disney Renaissance movies, but Disney movies, just in general, and that title is 1000% deserved. This film's message about racism is so botched and backwards and just downright horrible. If you've ever taken a history class before, you've probably figured out that the process of Europeans coming to the Americas and taking land away from the natives, killing, imprisoning, and enslaving them, and worse, was a bad thing. The reason I know you all know that is because the fact that it's bad is incredibly f***ing clear. You can throw around expressions about how not everything is black and white all you want, but this is about as close to black and white as you can get. There is an incredibly obvious wrong side in this situation, and so it should be no surprise that making a movie that poses the idea that both sides are equally wrong, and the whole conflict was just a big misunderstanding derived from one bad person, was always going to fail. And to make things even worse, in reality, John Smith was still John Smith, but Pocahontas was 12 years old, and she was essentially shipped off to England to be married and could not do anything about it. There were no forest spirits or kindly old tree or colors of wind, just a really all-around terrible situation that everyone knows is terrible and really should never have been presented in the way that it was in this absolute mess of a feature film. The only song I like is Colors of the Wind, and only when it's out of context. As for the rest, they're really not that good. The animation is okay, the backgrounds are pretty nice, and there are some good shots, but all of the characters are incapable of showing emotion, and I'm not just talking about their designs either. Ratcliffe is a total joke of a villain, but at least his ridiculousness gives me something to watch, because everyone else is dry and boring, and I think that's my biggest problem with this movie, or second biggest problem, sort of, obviously. Katzenberg was so determined to make a big, epic, serious movie that would win an Oscar that he accidentally forgot to tell people to make it interesting. The reason the movie is as serious as it is because every single character delivers all of their lines and performs all of their actions completely stoically and with no reason to make us care. And the reason the only thing anyone remembers about this movie is its terrible message is A, because it really is that terrible, and B, because there's nothing else even in the movie to be mad about. Pocahontas may be the highest movie in F tier, but it's still bland and dry, and also obnoxious and anger-inducing, agonizingly boring, and annoying, which just so happens to be the name of the tier, and that's not a coincidence. But on the bright side, we are entering a better tier right now. Hooray, hooray, hooray. We've finished the movies that I really never want to watch ever again. But we're not out of the woods yet. There are still a few more movies, 6 to be precise, that even though I don't feel miserable while watching them, I still don't feel anywhere close to good. D tier. Ew, I didn't enjoy watching that. Starting with the other Beauty and the Beast sequel, actually.
There's no such thing as magic.
Yep, here it is. I may have a personal vendetta against Enchanted Christmas, but even I couldn't justify putting this disaster any more than an additional 2 spots farther up the list. Belle's Magical World is by far the laziest of the 6 Disney sequels in this video, and maybe even the laziest movie period in this video, and you don't even need to watch the movie to know that. Look at any frame and you can clearly see for yourself. Originally I said that this movie's animation was fine, but I have no clue why I said that, because this is hands down the worst animation of any movie on this list. It feels like the whole thing was drawn in a month, and the script feels like it was written in a day. This is another movie that takes place sometime in between Belle arriving at the castle and the end of the original film. I was always under the impression that it was only a few months at most, but the way this movie portrays it, it could very well have been years. This is a compilation of 4 shorts, and every single one is terrible. There's one where the Beast is trying to go on some sort of date with Belle, but then he smacks this book guy across the room and breaks his spine. Get it? And so she gets mad, he gets defensive and refuses to apologize. Basically, the whole short is just 20 minutes of Belle and the Beast giving each other the silent treatment. It's boring, it sucks. Then there's a short where the feather duster thinks Lumiere is having an affair with Belle, which is probably the funniest thing this movie could have included, and she gets so jealous that by the end she and Lumiere end up dangling over a ravine. It's so insane the whole way through, and suffice it to say, this one is not boring. Then there's one where everyone tries to throw a party for Mrs. Potts because she's depressed, which sounds fake but is entirely real. The moral of everyone needing to work together is shoved down our throats many times, and it is very annoying. This one is also incredibly boring. Then there's one where Belle finds a bird with a broken wing and tries to nurse it back to health, but apparently the Beast hates birds and tries so hard to chase it out of the castle that he ends up falling down the stairs and breaking his neck. Not really, but I sort of wish after watching this movie. You guessed it. Boring. The only reason this isn't an F tier is because it does have some of that Troll in Central Park / Rockadoodle appeal where you can watch it just to be baffled by how it ended up this way. Doesn't have enough to actually put it with those movies, but it does have enough to just barely raise it to D tier. But it's still not a good movie. It sucks.
Won't somebody please think of the children? What kind of an example are we setting?
Man, watching ants sure is an experience. A lot of the movies on this list are meant for just general audiences and can be enjoyed equally by kids and adults, but for animated movies, as a rule of thumb, if they're going to swing to one side and try to appeal to one specific target audience, that audience is gonna be kids. Ants might be the only movie in this whole video that breaks that rule though, because it is very clearly not aimed towards kids, and I just don't like it. This movie has swearing and lots of sexual euphemisms, and it's incredibly violent, and the main villain's goal is to cleanse the colony of inferior genes and start anew as one unified Aryan race. The movie tries so hard to be a total fever dream, which is definitely helped by these nightmare fuel character designs, and for about the first half, I'd say it succeeds. The sequence of events leading up to the middle of the movie is so absolutely insane that I was seriously having a great time. They knew who this movie was made for, it's me, and I was liking it. I was pretty convinced by then that it would be a realistically bad movie, but the only thing that could actually make me dislike it would be if the entire second half was literally one of the most boring things I would ever see. And what are the chances that that would even happen? So the entire second half is one of the most boring things I've ever seen. It takes a break from keeping you entertained just by making you ask what is happening right now over and over again, and in its place, it does nothing. The two main characters sit around and just exist, and it's the most tedious thing I've ever watched. I never really liked the main character. I always thought he was a creep and a weirdo. What the hell was he doing here? He doesn't even belong here. And the princess always annoyed me with how arrogant and obnoxious she was. This was always a seriously flawed movie, but those flaws never really bothered me, which I think they knew was gonna happen, until the movie itself forced them to bother me, because there's no fever dream plot to distract me now. All of its issues that didn't matter before are front and center now, and they're quite literally the only thing for me to even latch onto. Also, there's a part where we meet two wasps, and then one of them gets crushed by a fly swatter, and they hold on this shot here of the wife's crushed corpse with the husband sobbing over her dead and mangled body for a solid 5 seconds. They just had no reason to do this, and I don't know if I'm ever going to forgive them for it. There's this thing I posed back in episode 10 called the DreamWorks theorem, which basically states that DreamWorks can never make more than like 2 good movies in a row, because they are a company that survives by making at least 2 fully animated feature films every single year, and it's really not sustainable to go all out on budget and effort for every single one of those. For every Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, we need to get a Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken. For every Kung Fu Panda 4, we need to get a Trolls 3... Wait, I think when I wrote that line in the script, that hadn't happened yet. So that aged badly, but if anything, that just proves my point. And for every Ants, we get a Prince of Egypt. What an insane fact it is that DreamWorks only made 2 movies in the 20th century. One of them is one of the best films ever made, and the other one is Ants, this movie. If that doesn't sum up the dichotomy of DreamWorks Animation LLC, formerly DreamWorks Animation SKG Incorporated, I don't know what does.
That explains the blood. Blood?
If you grew up with Titan AE and really love it, I totally understand. There is a ton to like about this movie. It's just that I can't help but notice a lot of stuff that I really don't like, and for me, that kinda takes precedence. I always thought I liked science fiction, but the more I've thought about it, the more I've started to realize that I don't necessarily know if I ever did. It might have just been that I liked Star Wars, and that's it. But regardless of how I feel about the genre or whatever, the story here is actually pretty interesting. Evil alien race blows up Earth. 10 years later, an edgy kid finds out his dad built a huge-ass spaceship that contains the DNA of pretty much every species on Earth, and he has to work together with his new friends to defeat the evil aliens and find a new planet to turn into the new Earth. That's pretty cool, and it's only sort of messed up by some Clone Wars Season 1 quality CGI, a twist villain, and another twist villain who betrays the first twist villain. Let's start with the CGI thing. I think all of the traditional hand-drawn elements look really good here. All of the backgrounds are really pretty, the character designs are almost universally good, and there are some really cool planets and aliens that are given the details and creativity that they deserve. Especially this planet with the trees that have giant hydrogen bubbles, so if you hit one they explode in a giant fireball, which looks really beautiful and is just objectively cool. The blood is also very well animated, aggressively well animated. I don't know why Don Bluth suddenly decided that realistic blood was necessary, but whatever. Problem is, all of the computer generated stuff looks very dated. It adds a cool element to the evil aliens because they're just made out of pure energy anyway, so it just makes them look even more foreign and strange. I'm fine with it there, but any scene where the camera is out in space inevitably has a couple of spaceships in frame, and they look pretty bad. There are a few scenes where the bad effects do actually kind of take me out of the experience, and I don't know why they ended the movie off with this hilariously bad looking shot. I know that perception of what counted as good and bad CGI was different 25 years ago, but surely someone had second thoughts about this, right? I'm not really the biggest fan of the characters either. The main character does kind of feel like that edgy protagonist who doesn't trust people anymore that we've all seen in dozens of movies before. This one girl is kind of just the edgy love interest who doesn't trust people anymore that we've all seen in dozens of movies before. And I can't even bring myself to talk about either of these twist villain characters for any period of time, and it might just be a symptom of me apparently not liking science fiction as much as I thought I did, but the pacing felt really slow to me here. I was never 100% bored for more than a few specific scenes, but I never really went above 10% interest the entire time. I like the turtle character and basically nothing else. I can understand why some people like this movie, but I'm struggling to think of a single reason why I would ever want to watch it again. And also, this technically came out in 2000, but it was the only one of Don Bluth's movies not in this century, so I probably could have gotten away with just not talking about it, but here it is anyway. It seems like a pretty underwhelming way for Bluth to go out, but based on everything we've seen in the last hour or so, it felt pretty set in stone that he was always gonna go out like this.
New York, still the greatest city in the world. Don't you think it's enough to make you love New York?
Whose idea was Oliver and Company? I hope they were fired immediately, because for the last movie Disney made before the Disney Renaissance, oh boy, it sure is a huge disappointment. Oliver Twist, I feel like, is a fine story, but as soon as you use animals instead of people and put it in 1980s New York instead of 1830s England, it loses a lot of what it had going for it. This is a boring, pointless movie, and I'd be surprised if anyone genuinely likes it, and nostalgia does not count. Oliver is so void of any personality or traits at all. He just walks around and things just happen to him for the whole movie. I really tried to get invested in the story because I remember liking it last time, but it's really hard to care when the main character seemingly doesn't even care himself. Originally, these Dobermans were supposed to kill Oliver's parents, and his motivation throughout the movie was to exact revenge on them. That might be pretty dark and also nothing like Oliver Twist, but at least it's something. I'd rather have a protagonist fueled by vengeance than a protagonist fueled by nothing at all who just floats in the breeze and does whatever he's told. Plus, all of these dogs are so annoying. Dodger in particular, he's not artful in the slightest, and if he didn't give us the Why Should I Worry song, which granted is amazing, I don't think he'd have a single good thing about him. He's the best example of that like all-American street smart certified rizologist cliche, which is like my least favorite type of character in these old Disney movies. Tramp is one to a much lesser extent, Thomas O'Malley from the Aristocats is one, and Billy Joel Dog here is probably the worst offender. You know who I'm talking about here? Like, they're always mentors or love interests. They always have like the whitest accent you could possibly imagine. They have cringy, stupid ass nicknames for everyone. They refer to themselves in the third person. They have a bunch of like dumb one-liners, and they always say stuff like, "Listen, bud, I've been on these streets my whole life. If you want to survive out here, you gotta go with the flow," which transitions into some cheesy-ass song about going with the flow, and it pisses me off, man. He's one of the most unlikable assholes on this whole list. There's a point where he essentially kidnaps Oliver from his owner's house, and when Oliver says he wants to go back, he just goes, "I thought you were one of us, part of the gang, but whatever, go back there." And he tries to guilt trip like this child. Dude, what is your deal here? Of course, there's also the Hispanic stereotype chihuahua who's hyperactive and lusts over every woman he sees, because there always is one, and this movie is no exception. And it's not like I really like the other dogs that much either. There are only two characters I actually enjoy in this movie, and those are Fagin and Sykes. I sympathize with Fagin a little. He's likable, and when I don't think about how he's voiced by the troll from A Troll in Central Park, I almost start to enjoy watching this movie when he's on screen. And Sykes is a perfect villain, you know, for the 5 total minutes we see him. So it's more like he doesn't do anything wrong in those 5 minutes. He looks like Kronk if he fell on hard times, and I guess he's sort of threatening. The fight at the end is the only part of this movie where I felt remotely awake, and that's technically because of him, because he's a villain, so I guess that makes him the best character by default. Honestly, the fact that my favorite part of the movie I'm still so indifferent about kinda says it all. The plot goes all over the place, it's agonizing to get through at times. I don't really like the animation style. New York City has never looked less interesting. All of these scenes with the CGI cars haven't aged the greatest. I dislike every song except for the one that's really good. It's not like I hate everything, but I don't think I actually like anything. And if Howard Ashman hadn't shown up for The Little Mermaid and used his songwriting and Broadway musical expertise to catapult the studio to its highest point right after this film, I mean, judging by this, Disney probably would have collapsed in a few years. But hey, that's just Oliver and Company for you. And the fact that Disney had the lack of self-awareness to release this movie on the same day as The Land Before Time, thinking it would somehow be a better film, is exactly the fate that this disaster deserves.
You're not so bad for a bug-eyed little creep. With a little grooming.
Grooming?
Seriously, when the going gets tough, you don't want a criminal lawyer, right? You want a criminal.
Yep, that's me.
Listen, I'm sure Peter Pan realistically is a pretty middle-of-the-road Disney movie, but the personal vendetta I have against everything this film stands for stops me from placing it any higher on this list. I'm sure many of you have movies that probably aren't too bad, but you just can't stand watching or thinking about them anyway. And honestly, there is no better example of that for me than Peter Pan. With the understanding that almost everything I'm about to say, almost, is my own opinion that's shared by almost nobody else, let's dive right in. Now, before I start offending everyone, not in the way you might be thinking, don't worry, I feel like I should mention how a lot of the stuff in this movie is actually decent. even though the placements of these movies are largely determined by my opinion, I think it's still important to share some of my slightly less subjective thoughts during these reviews as well, so I don't alienate everyone with some of my hot takes, and this take is certainly lukewarm at least. It's only fair to mention all the good stuff that makes this movie so well known. For one, the animation is pretty good, except for when they use it to be racist. Neverland looks really nice, and even though we explore every nook and cranny much more thoroughly than I would have liked, at least the nooks and crannies are really detailed and pretty, plus all of the designs and especially the flying sequences are honestly really good, and the kids are also decidedly not annoying. They don't really have any other real traits, but that's fine. They're kind of just there, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Also, I guess I like Tinkerbell, but it feels weird that the original version of this classic Disney character was originally so angry and jealous and spiteful and just so unlike how we usually think of her, and the Lost Boys are, and this movie has some fire songs. Second Star to the Right carries so much weight behind it, and it's one of the only times I've watched the opening credits to one of these Disney movies and thought, wow, I'm actually kind of enjoying myself and not just waiting for it to move on. I kind of wish it showed up again, and You Can Fly elevates the scene where they fly over London to the point where I would genuinely consider it some peak Disney. The rest of the songs are pretty good too, except for that one, which sort of undoes everything this movie had going for it musically. Hook and Smear are actually really awesome too. No matter how much this movie annoys me at times, I'm not a complete fool, and let's be honest, pretty much everyone knows that this iconic duo absolutely rocks. The TikTok croc, all of the mannerisms, all of the visual gags, even the worst Peter Pan adaptation would have to be practically brain dead to get Captain Hook wrong. Like it or not, he's an icon, he's a legend, and he is the moment, and credit where credit is due, most of that is because of this movie, and most of the scenes with them make me forget how painful this viewing experience is otherwise. Which seems like a good time to transition into why this movie is in the bottom quarter of the list. There are three main reasons, and we'll go in order of increasing importance. First, Peter Pan still annoys me because of how obnoxiously sexist he is.
It's a wonderful nurse, although Father says...
Girls talk too much.
Yes, girls talk too... Oh.
Well, get on with it, girl.
What did she say?
She says you're a big ugly girl.
Oh.
Bro, chill out! Plus, he takes advantage of Tinkerbell the whole movie, and it's not the most comfortable to watch. She clearly likes him, and he exploits that at every possible chance, until the end when she literally explodes. I know the whole point of his character is that he doesn't want to grow up, and that fact is what makes this particular issue the least important, but even still, I could barely suppress the urge to tell this brat to get off my lawn the whole movie. Secondly, there's so much boring nonsense here. For a movie that actually has a plot, it really loves to act like it doesn't. So much of this movie follows the Alice in Wonderland style of just doing a tour of somewhere at a brisk jog with nothing really happening and no indication present of where this is going, except instead of Wonderland, this is just an island. And even though some parts obviously look nice, like I said before, does that really make a difference pacing-wise? And of course, the biggest issue I have with this movie, something all of you kinda already know about, of all of the movies on this list, this one, Peter Pan, is the most explicitly and obscenely racist. And it's not my place to really say, but I feel like the racism in this movie feels more pointed and aggressive and malicious than any of the racism in Dumbo, for example. What makes the red man red fits right in with the most disgusting caricatures ever put in animation. It's one of the only things on this entire list that makes me genuinely angry. Thumbelina as a whole filled me with anger for similar reasons, but no individual scene anywhere else, maybe in cinema, even comes close to pissing me off as much as this absolutely abysmal, deplorable song does, and I can only imagine how insufferable seeing this must be for actual Native Americans. I didn't remember just how many slurs are in this 2-minute song, but wow, by the end of it, I almost felt physically sick. I'd show you examples, except the video would literally get age restricted if I did. Here's a still with the captions turned on. If I get demonetized for this, know that it was because I showed an actual line from an actual movie in the Disney canon that the Walt Disney Corporation still profits off of via merchandise to this day. This alone dragged this movie down at least 10 places, but it's not like anything else in this godforsaken abomination of a film was good enough to remotely raise it back up. All of the positives I mentioned are just brief islands of solitude in a never-ending sea of misery. In no universe would I ever willingly subject myself to all of this just to watch some good scenes with Captain Hook at the very end. No movie that unironically says the phrase, "Alright man, go out and capture a few Indians," will ever be a movie that I seriously like. And there's the whole thing with how much this film revels in the idea of jealous women that I haven't even mentioned yet, and will continue not to because I'm too tired of talking about this movie that honestly just doesn't deserve it. I would be infinitely more likely to watch this if it was just a Pro ZD cut where it's 80 minutes of him acting out the whole thing. Otherwise, I have absolutely zero qualms with throwing this movie away and never thinking of it again. Tinkerbell, Jake and the Neverland Pirates, and various other pieces of vastly better media carry over all of the worthwhile stuff anyway.
You little pest! I think I'll add you to my bug collection. Come on, monkey. Little birdie, want to talk to monkey. Have nice banana. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo.
I've only seen 6, and there are still more than 20 in my future, but I can say with certainty that The Return of Jafar is the most Disney sequel feeling Disney sequel that I've seen. Not a smidgen of effort was put into this film. They couldn't be bothered to write a script or concept or anything with any original ideas. Well, Jafar was the villain last time, so what if he were just the villain again? Boom, new movie. Jafar returning is literally 100% of the appeal here. It's what the movie is named after, it's the only thing that happens, and it's the only reason anyone would ever watch it. You can also tell that Disney had no idea for what the movie should be actually about beyond that very surface level idea, which is why the entire thing is full of every single trope you've ever heard of. Iago, the parrot, is the main character in this one, and it's all about him learning to be a good guy, but of course along the way Aladdin and Jasmine end up trusting him, only for there to be a big misunderstanding, and they're like, I thought we could trust you, but you're just the same as always. I should have known. This is also the second liar revealed trope in the movie, but the first one is so dumb and pointless and immediately smoothed over that it isn't even worth mentioning. None of the characters act anything like they did in the original, except for Jafar, who's still just as void of any traits except being evil as he was in the original, but even he isn't really as interesting here. Aladdin and Jasmine share essentially nothing with their counterparts from the original, except, like, their names, and that's basically it. And Robin Williams doesn't even play the genie in this movie because Disney hadn't gotten over their ego and apologized to him for breaking their contract yet. So instead, the genie is played by Homer Simpson here, which is just as off-putting as you think. Every single new character that we meet is uninteresting, every song except that one Gilbert Gottfried sings is terrible, and the movie ends with Aladdin being framed for the Sultan's assassination, with Jafar entering his jail cell disguised as Jasmine and announcing that Aladdin will be publicly executed for his crimes. How is the only semi-original thing in the movie this? But what might be the most egregious part of this film is the animation, which is just truly terrible. Like, this isn't the only movie on this list with direct-to-VHS animation syndrome, but that doesn't make its existence here any less annoying. It just makes the entire picture so not fun to look at. Everything just looks so washed out. Nothing is the color it's supposed to be. Remember what the genie used to look like? He looks like he's been Dementor's kissed. That's the third time I've used that stupid expression in this video. What happened to the rest of his color? And I'm not really sure where else to mention it, so I'm just gonna mention it here. But this movie's also just cheesy as hell.
It must have cost a fortune.
Oh no, it was a steal.
The Return of Jafar is just such a lazy movie. I don't hate it or anything, but I really didn't enjoy my experience watching it. It's almost at the level of being labeled as kind of just whatever, but it was just shy of being acceptable enough for that. But as the highest movie in D tier, it means that we'll be able to look at some movies that are acceptable enough, starting right now. Well, technically for you guys watching this part 1 video, not for another like 6 weeks or so, because lamentably, this is the end for today. But fret not, because soon enough, you will be graced with the C and B tiers. So I'll see you then.